begin. So last time I have started to speak about the Vipalasa. That's the classic list of the 4 distortions of perception. And I've added a 5th one, which goes like this: seeing what is part of the web of life as separate from it. So I was saying, if the Buddha would be alive at this point, most likely he would have added that as a 5th one. And I want to continue with the Vipalasa over the next few weeks, but today I would like to talk a little bit about the sound of silence. And I hope that Jack is going to be okay with that, because he was on the retreat, and Julie also. But I think one can't hear it often enough. I've just returned from a retreat where I've been co-teaching that with Ayananda Bodhi and Ayasantusika. And the sound of silence was, and still most likely is, the main meditation object which Ajahn Sumedho, the main teacher at Amaravati Buddhist Monastery in the UK, which he was teaching at the time when I arrived there in the fall of 1992. That's also when I met Ayananda Bodhi, and Luang Po, as we called him, Luang Po Sumedho, was teaching that as his main object. And the sound of silence is not found in the early Buddhist scriptures. So it's not in the canon, which compiles all of the teachings the Buddha gave in person when he was living here in Iron Age India. And later on it was mentioned in the Mahayana, in particular in Chan Buddhism, which emerged in China around the 6th century. And there's a key scripture in Chan, which is the Shurangama Sutra, and it describes 25 spiritual practices that different bodhisattvas present to the Buddha as being the way that they themselves were liberated. And then the Buddha says, of those 25 practices, the most effective one is that of Avalokiteshvara or Kuan Yin Bodhisattva. And it's a meditation based on hearing, where they are entering through the gateway of the ear faculty. They enter into what's called the current of the awakened ones. It's an inner listening, not only with our ears, but with our whole entire being, our skin, our bones, our heart. A deep listening that requires a complete receptivity. And this is very much the same, what we are practicing here. I call it earth listening or listening to the web of life. It's also like an entry point into an expanded perception of ourselves and of our world, and how they behave. And there are also other traditions which mention practices of listening. And when Ajahn Sumedho was beginning with that practice, he wasn't aware of that. But after he lived for many years in Thailand, where it's very noisy in the forest, there are so many cicadas and other insects, which make a very, very intense, shrill sound. So he took that as a meditation object then, because he just couldn't escape it. But then when he came to England, in particular in the winter time, when there was snow down on the ground, there was this, he called it a deafening silence. And then later on, he started teaching it, and then he found different books, or people mentioned it to him. There's actually traditions which use the sound of silence. And I just want to mention a few. The Sikh tradition, they call it the Shabd or the Naam yoga. And then in the Vedas, it's mentioned as the Naad or the Shruti. In the Upanishads, it's mentioned as Nada or Udgit. in the Quran as Kalma, and Pythagoras called it the music of the spheres. And I want to put a link in the chat right now, and this is a book, a little booklet by Ajahn Amaro, who is the current abbot of Amaravati Buddhist Monastery. It's a PDF which you can download if you like, where he speaks about the sound of silence and about Ajahn Sumedho and the whole thing. And there's also available in the bookstores a book by Ajahn Sumedho which is called The Sound of Silence, in case you're interested. But that little booklet is for free distribution. So, whatever this is called, the sound of silence or the vibration of the web of life, whatever it is, it invites us into a journey of discovery, a leaving behind of limited and limiting assumptions through conditioning on an individual and also on a systemic level. An expansion of perception through a more intuitive and poetic vision of where we are, who we are, and how it is. That's these three entry points, which I have heard for the first time from Pat McCabe, Woman Stand Shining, a Diné ceremonial leader and international speaker. So that's where it all comes together, really. Because we are all human and we have a certain equipment, and that's, as we are progressing on the path and letting go layers and layers of conditioning, there's more and more overlap. And I think, at this time in history, the sound of silence can be experienced as a call for humanity to a conscious deepening of the relationship of our species with that which gives us life. And on the retreat, I was calling it the SOS of the web of life. SOS is an international Morse code distress signal. So the sound of silence can be listened to as an SOS from the web of life to get our attention, to take more interest in where we are and how we are and how this all works. So to reconnect via the SOS, via the sound of silence, however it presents itself in your experience. And, for some of us, it's a high-pitched sound. That was the main way how Ajahn Sumedho was teaching it. And I experience it also as a vibration, as an aliveness, as a vitality, a pulsation of the energy body. And we can also experience both at the same time. And some people experience it as a light. They can see with their inner eye, you could say. So a sound, a vibration, a light, or a luminosity rather. So that's different ways. But whatever it is and however it presents, it invites us to listen to what we already always belong to. And let go, of our human supremacy thinking that we need to figure all of this out, that we need to control all of this. Because that's just like being inside of a dream of conditioning. And the sound of silence helps us, to let go of that contraction. And opening the mind, opening the heart. And I really like that quote by Rob Bayer, who was a Gaia House teacher who passed away about 10 years ago. And he said, practice is not practice unless it affects perception. Practice is not practice unless it affects perception. affects perception in the sense of opening and seeing things in a bigger context. And then when the mind, the heart, sees things in a bigger context, conditioning becomes conscious, and then the mind responds with letting go. It's like looking behind the curtain of a magician and then seeing all of the props and then, oh, okay, that's how it is. And then something changes and you can never go back. And that's, a way how we can illustrate what these stages of awakening are. It's a falling away of a delusion, of an illusion. It's a cutting through the vipallasa, the distortions of perception. And then we live in a bigger world and we can allow more life to land in us. There's not so much like fearful contraction there. So I think let's now, shift gear into meditation again, and please find a posture you can sustain for a good 40 minutes. And in a way, we can say this meditation is about remembering what we have forgotten. Because we have emerged out of the web of life. And, our bodies have this elemental intelligence of earth element, water element, fire element, wind element, space element. But somehow, we have lost the receptivity because of the conditioning and the filters, which are currently still overlaying our way of perceiving. And we can't really, kind of blow that away, but we can become more and more conscious of it. And that's the route the Buddha has suggested that we go. Not willfully trying to change what the mind is experiencing, but making it conscious, making it conscious, making it conscious, and then allowing a dropping away. But just diving deeper. So you're just, sitting on the cushion on the chair and sensing into the body from inside, the weight of it on the cushion on the chair. The body knows how to do this. And it's held in place by the gravity of the body of the planet. And the body remembers wholeness because it has emerged out of the planet. And it can regulate itself in relation to that knowing if we give it the space. There's an inner dynamic, an inner intelligence, which we just need to give the space so it does its thing. And to just continue slowly and again, when we end up contracted into some kind of story, some kind of emotion, noticing it, and then coming back to listening with the whole body. Into the aliveness, vibrancy, vitality of the energy body, which doesn't end at the skin. And taking this teaching which I received from Ajahn Sumedho, and somehow connecting it with Earth, because this is what's happening right now on this planet, that we are caught back into remembering where we come from on a physical level, because we've gotten so disconnected, so overemphasizing the mind, and coming down to the ground again. Different eras need different emphasis. The core teaching is timeless, but certain emphasis, certain ways of looking are historically relevant because of what's happening. As we are growing out of the old paradigm of human supremacy and the original sin story, which has been dominating Western cultures and made us into ravenous, crazy consumers, and this scarcity thinking, all projected onto this amazing, abundant, generous planet who has been sustaining life for almost 5 billion years without anybody directing it. But it's more an orchestra, an intelligent being, an aliveness. We can remember. So sensing into the body, the vibrancy, the vitality, and this body, as an organ of listening, as a receptor, as a satellite dish for the earth as a living being which knows what to do to sustain life. And we are small cells inside of that body, and we can listen. We can open ourselves for instructions which are not coming in as words, but they're coming in on this vibrationary level. You know, and if you consider it helpful, you can visualize to be inside of Earth. To be inside of the Guru. And the word, you know, Guru, the root of the word Guru means just weighty one. The one which has great influence. If we like it or not. And many of the indigenous peoples around the world, they very strongly advise against, you know, extracting anything from the body of the earth, any minerals and other things. Because they know that this is an alive being. You can't just take out the organs because you want to. So sensing into that vibrancy and remembering, you know, James Hillman's quote, a Jungian American psychologist who said, to sense deeply we must imagine, and to imagine accurately we must sense. And, you know, relating to that sound as a calling. You know, to dive deeper into that not knowing with the intellect. But there's a different kind of knowing which is asked for. Because the intellect is too small, can't really contain this. It can only serve what is known. Known in a different way. Known with the intuition, the poetic way of knowing, which art can support, you know, to come forth. But not numbers and things like that. Spreadsheets and computers, they can come later. And, you know, that mystery can be kind of terrifying in one way, but it's also our deepest resource in another way. And I think that's what we can feel through this listening, you know, that it's resourcing, it's energizing, it's healing, nourishing. Because the spirit moves in those places of not knowing. and we need to learn to attune to it. Because the intellect is afraid of the mystery, but we are much more than the intellect. We just haven't been trained that way, but we can train it now. And I think, this was my key experience when I was about 15, when my parents took me to, I don't know, was it Kenya or Tanzania, that experience. When I saw Maasai, and I just saw them, this is a tribe in, I think Tanzania and Kenya they live. And I saw the way they were walking and just going about their lives, daily lives. And they had this very deep recognition that they had a very different way of connecting to Earth than I had available at that time. And it very deeply shook me up, And then I just changed my whole life basically after that experience, slowly. And that has informed my searching all the time, since I was 15. I wanted to find what is this mystery. And it took me so many places. And here I am, and now, at the last third of my life, I think I have finally gotten a glimpse of it. So that's great. Because there were many years when I just was thinking, I'm just so lost, I couldn't really formulate what it was, because it was just a glimpse, a split second. And then sometimes I had such experiences again when I lived with indigenous fisher people on an island in South Thailand, when I met my first teacher, Ajahn Buddhadasa. There were those glimpses along the path. When I met my Tibetan teacher, some experiences at the monastery in England. So this was like little crumbs, on the floor. And they showed me the way of the taste, which cannot be put into words, but it had that immense depths to it. Something like what Carl Gustav Jung calls, the unforgotten wisdom at the core of the psyche. When that resonates, that's so deep and so such a calling, you can't really turn away. It has a tremendous magnetism. And art can sometimes conjure that up. But the most powerful conductor is nature. And if we have been working with this long enough, it becomes kind of clear that what the heart longs for is already always here. No matter, how messy the situation is. It's always already here. The silence behind the sound, the aliveness, the vitality in everything. And it's in the friction of our daily lives that this aliveness can be experienced if we remember it. If we don't get completely caught up in all of the issues. Because it's, how we meet the struggle is where the practice becomes more and more integrated and grounded. The question is not, is there a struggle, but it's more like, how do you meet it? That is the practice. Can you slow down? Can you, take some time for practice, formal practice and prayer, giving our lives a framework within which we have the support it needs to learn from everything and stabilize ourselves. So we don't need to control life, but we need a framework from which to meet life. And the Buddha's teaching are an excellent framework already. We got that already down. And what at the beginning, it's just all about, how vulnerable all of that is. And then, as we are getting stronger and more stuff is cleared out, it turns into being part of a shared communication system with Earth, with Gaia. And living from that place, finding security in that purpose, to express what is being communicated as good as we can. Finding safety in our purpose rather than in shopping and distracting ourselves. if you could just, kind of let go of one concept, the concept of original sin, and replace it with original beauty, it would completely change everything. But of course, that can't be just done willfully, but we can contemplate it. How this assumption has wreaked so much havoc. The scarcity assumption. And then it's really happening now with some people owning billions and billions and billions, and some people nothing at all. And the vast gap is truly unbelievably cruel. So listening with the whole body. And maturing, into being a good participant. And today I'd like to share a poem again, a poem by Mark Nepo, and it goes like this. Having laughed enough and lost enough, I'm no longer searching, just opening. No longer trying to make sense of pain, but trying to be a soft and sturdy home in which real things can land. These are the irritations that wrap into a pearl. So we can talk for a while, but then we must listen, the way rocks listen to the sea. And we can churn at all that goes wrong, but then we must lay all distractions down and water every living seed. And yes, on nights like tonight, I too feel alone, but seldom do I face it squarely enough to see that it's a door into the endless breath that has no breather, into the surf that human shells call God. Having laughed enough and lost enough, I'm no longer searching, just opening. No longer trying to make sense of pain, but trying to be a soft and sturdy home in which real things can land. These are the irritations that wrap into a pearl. So we can talk for a while, but then we must listen, the way rocks listen to the sea. And we can churn at all that goes wrong, but then we must lay all distractions down and water every living seed. And yes, on nights like tonight, I too feel alone, but seldom do I face it squarely enough to see that it's a door into the endless breath that has no breather, into the surf that human shells call God.